Good evening and happy Friday, everybody. Brad here. Mika's somewhere over in there. Welcome to Bradcast, episode 2. So to catch everybody up, I know it's been a few weeks since I posted my first video. As you can see, I've got the setup now. I got the headphones, I got the microphone, I have the pod track so I can hook the microphone and headphones up directly to my laptop and use the webcam on my laptop. At some point I'll probably buy a different webcam. This one isn't that great of quality. But other than that, things have just been very busy the past couple weeks, doing a lot of self-care. I've had a lot of doctor appointments just to finally take care of some things that I kind of been putting off for a long time, and things have been going good. So before I get started, I also want to give a shout out to my friend Lindsay, who gave me some feedback on my first video. She is a counselor at Chesapeake High School in Baltimore County, and she pointed out to me that my understanding of how cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something that she employs and she believes in very much in terms of its success, she pointed out to me that my understanding of it was a little mixed up, that the kind of therapy I was describing wasn't, in that first video, wasn't really CBT. It was actually what they would probably call, I think it was either success therapy or solutions-based therapy, which basically only focuses strictly on the desired behavior, let's say. It doesn't get into breaking up the bad logic or the bad cognitive critical thinking that leads to the poor behavior. Whereas in CBT, let's use, for example, somebody who has an anxiety disorder. Let's say they're going through something that they start to catastrophize in their head, like what could go wrong next and how it just leads, like, let's say, to their imminent doom, right? They think their life's going to be over. CBT would be the kind of therapy you'd employ to kind of say, all right, how can we look at this differently so that you don't get to thinking that your life's over and then you start acting out. So I want to give a shout out to her for that, and also for her words of encouragement. I expressed to her I'm a novice at this stuff. I took intro to psychology back in college during a time when I thought I was going to become a neuroscience teacher. So I was taking that towards the teacher certification, and I haven't really gotten into studying psychology since. It's something I dabble in or read on, but I just want to thank her because she said to me, that even if I don't have any formal education in it, it seems that I pick up these concepts pretty quickly. So thank you very much for that. And it kind of just makes me think about, in my own therapy that I do every week, we don't use, my therapist doesn't really use CBT, I would say. She uses something called family systems, which is in some ways psychoanalytical, but I don't think it goes quite as deep as psychoanalysis. I don't think it can quite cause the deep spirals and overthinking that maybe psychoanalysis can do. I think it's pretty straightforward. And there's elements of it that are similar to CBT, things like, when a certain part of you comes up for something and it's remembering something that happened in your past a certain way, we talk about basically restoring that experience so that that feeling, if it comes up for you again, or if that part comes up for you again, the feelings that are associated with that part are different, and thus it can impact your behavior or the way you adapt to the situation you find yourself in that part coming up against. Sorry about that. So for today's video, the thing I want to talk about is there we go. That's a little better. That's a little. Okay, there we. Something just doesn't quite seem right. So, So for today's video, the thing I want to talk about because in that first video I mentioned the kind of channel I want this to be, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics. But one of the big things that I notice, being somebody who's been dealing with depression and anxiety as a young man for the past at least 5-6 years, and especially during that time, dealing with feelings of loneliness, being single, especially during a time when a lot of my friends are married or engaged. Many of them have started having their first children. Some of them, I think, are even on their second child now. I've spent a lot of time online, and I've consumed a lot of content, a lot of self-help content. And one of the things I mentioned was a lot of the stuff that gets targeted towards young men, I don't think talks a lot about emotional attunement, and I don't think it talks a lot about doing some of that internal work that you got to do, and building a life from the internal work, and then letting that impact your external world rather than the opposite way. And not that all of the content that I consumed was bad, but some of them definitely, I think, crossed a certain line at some point. And in particular, a lot of the content that I see targeted towards young men, excuse me, it gets a constant theme I see is this concept of, if you're a young man struggling, and especially let's say you're a young man struggling to feel like you can attract romantic partners, or you're struggling to have a long-term or keep a long-term relationship. One of the things I keep seeing pop up is this idea of, well, what you need to do is you need to be, as they would say, less of a beta male and more of an alpha male. And there are some elements to this that I agree with. I don't agree with the terms. I think that the terms kind of play off of people's emotions. I've actually started doing a lot of some research into this, and a lot of research into this suggests that books or content that uses these kinds of terms, really they use those terms as a marketing strategy. These terms don't actually mean anything. And so I'll cover really quick. So some of the good things that maybe they'll point out in some of these videos, they'll talk about, you want to be more confident in yourself. You want to find a career that fulfills you. You want to be yourself and not let other people force you to change. Those are all great traits and great habits to practice, right? But a lot of times when they start talking about being an alpha male, they'll kind of go beyond that. It's like, well, you need to make yourself look more attractive. You need to work on your body more. You need to, live a certain kind of lifestyle. You need to have a certain social status. All these things in order to attract, all these external factors in order to attract more women to potentially be a long-term partner. And I just eventually hit a point where I was like, I think that this is all bullshit. And like I said, maybe, it's one thing to say to somebody, you have to be a little bit more confident in yourself. It's one thing to say, you should just be yourself. Don't let other people force you to change. Sometimes, though, this kind of advice that insists that, well, you need to be an alpha male, it's kind of like, well, you need to be more dominating. You need to not care at all what, let's say, your partner says to you, or how they feel about you, or how they feel, let's say, about the amount of attention that you give them. Stuff like that. And they just kind of, to me, and I think this is basically what I said in the first video, what I think that they lack is the message of emotional attunement and emotional presence. And I think that, I would say to anybody that thinks like, oh man, like I'm a beta male and I need to be more of an alpha male, I would just say to you, don't fall into that trap. Like, yeah, maybe you want to work on your self-confidence. Maybe you want to work on, kind of being mindful of what your best skills are and how that could maybe help you, and what your interests are and how that could help you, maybe help point you in the right direction of what kind of career or job you would find fulfilling and sustaining for you long term. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that, because in a way it's almost like, in some ways they start to imply that you might have to actually change who you are at your core in order to get other people to like you. And that's a really dangerous idea. You're just going to end up suppressing your own emotions and your own authenticity even more. And it's not going to work out well for you. It might work out well temporarily. And in some ways, it may work out in a social circle where everybody, as I would say, are kind of in their more primal functions. They're kind of in survival mode. They're not so present up here. They're not truly communicating. They're not truly present with one another. You might see some success, but, I think if you do that internal work, learn how to be more emotionally present with yourself and with others, you can still work. I think that that can fuel your self-confidence even more than things like making more money or, having a certain, let's say, kind of body based upon how often or how hard you work out, right? I know, listen, I would love to have a six-pack. I don't know if I'll ever have it. I weigh about between 180 to 185 pounds right now. I'm a little over 30% body fat. I'm relatively healthy. I do know I want to lose at least 10 pounds. When I weigh more than 175 pounds, I don't breathe well at night while I sleep. And so, I wouldn't say I snore or anything like that. I can just tell my quality of sleep is not as good when I weigh more than 175 pounds. I just know it. And I've known that probably for about 2 years now, 2 or 3 years. It wasn't something I picked up really on before. So listen, trust me, I want to work out hard. Unfortunately, I can't right now. That's another story. Hopefully I can in a couple months. But I just want to encourage people, yes, work on your self-confidence, work on, what kind of career you want, work on building the life you want, but work on making sure that you're attuning to your physical and your emotional needs and build your life from the inside out. Don't be doing all this stuff on the outside trying to make you feel better inside, because chances are you're going to push certain parts of you down or certain emotions that you feel down, and it might feel fine for a while, but sometimes something, at some point something's probably going to happen in your life that's going to bring those parts up that you didn't acknowledge, that you didn't let them do their job or whatever. And next thing you know, you're going to be taking it out, let's say, on the person closest to you. And so next thing you know, everything that you work so hard for can fall apart because you weren't actually being true to yourself. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I don't like the terminology of alpha male versus beta male. I think it's bullshit. Don't pay attention to it. There's research out there. You can look up the toxic myth of the alpha male. I won't say that every content creator that I see or that I've watched that uses these terms I'm going to say that they don't always have bad intentions. In fact, some of their content's really good. And like I said, sometimes, I think they look at self-confidence and stuff more so the way I do, per se, than some of their more extreme counterparts. But I just think that in general, some of that content can potentially cross a line that shouldn't be crossed, or maybe not that it shouldn't be crossed, but that isn't actually helpful. And I think that it connects more with people's anger than it does any true, authentic message. So I'm going to move on from that, but I am going to kind of tie this into another topic. And because speaking of seeing these terms out there now of alpha male and beta male, another term that I've recently seen come up is, and this is something I'm starting to see in some women's social media posts, is this idea that they're an alpha female. And I say this in the context of the social media posts I've seen, and this isn't just one person or anything. I want to be clear about that. What I've seen is them talking about, and I didn't actually read these articles, but it just kind of sounded like maybe they were sort of bemoaning the idea that, well, like, I'm an alpha female, I have this job, I'm super independent, like, I have a well-paying job, maybe even have a child, and I don't like that I might have to date below my status and to find a long-term partner. And, you know, this is also making me think of a post, a tweet that I saw once, where it was something like, bad men make it easy for average men to do the bare minimum, or something like that. I'm probably mixing that up a little bit. And when I saw these things, I kind of got a little defensive as a man. Initially, I kind of felt a little twinge of like, what? Right? Especially when I saw that tweet. But rather than reacting to it, I kind of stopped for a second. I thought about it. I was like, what I believe, and kind of tying this into the earlier subject of what I think young men are missing, and the message that's missing is about emotional attunement. What I think these posts are really trying to imply, and certainly what that tweet is trying to imply, is that we need more men who have a high emotional intelligence and are capable of being emotionally present with their female partners. I'm going to take a second here to just say, obviously I'm speaking about this more so in cisgender heterosexual terms. I'm not trying to exclude anybody from this topic. That's just what I'm familiar with. I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but just for the way that my mind still kind of thinks, and to keep this video rolling, those are the terms I'm usually going to be talking about this in, or the kind of context I'm usually going to be talking about these topics in, more than likely. Certainly in this video. So certainly in regards to that tweet, that's kind of what I told myself. I was like, I don't, because, I had all these ideas in my head, like, do you mean men doing the bare minimum, like you think that do you think men need to make a certain amount of money? Do you think that they need to give you a certain kind of gifts, or a certain number of gifts, or take you on a certain number of vacations? Like, what did that tweet mean? And like I said, I kind of stepped back from that, and I kind of said, okay, something, probably what it just means is we need more men who practice emotional intelligence, who practice being emotionally present, and are tuned to themselves enough that they can A, express how they're feeling in a way that's not destructive, and B, also be able to clue into what it is that I might be feeling, and help provide me a space for me to feel like I can safely talk to them about how I'm feeling. Now, but going back to these articles about alpha females, and similar articles that maybe don't use that term, but talk about successful women thinking, believing, or even being afraid of having to date down. If you're somebody who identifies as an alpha female, and again, I'm not a fan of that term. I mean, I think it's wonderful to, you should, it's a great idea to be confident in yourself, and to be independent, and to, view yourself as successful, I think that's all wonderful. I don't know that it's necessary to call yourself an alpha anything. Alpha male, alpha female, I don't think that's necessary. It's a label that you're going to be giving yourself, and you're still going to be comparing yourself to other people. And you're still going to be looking at yourself as either somebody that's above all others or somebody that has to move up to impress others. And you may want to, I encourage you to think about if that's what you really want to do. But in regards to the dating down thing, you know, you shouldn't, I would say that it's not a good idea for anybody to settle for less than what they want. It's not a good idea for you to be with somebody that you don't actually love or don't actually like. You know, and certainly you should go for what you want. Absolutely. And I'll even say, you know, if you want to live a certain kind of lifestyle, you know, maybe you do want to date somebody that makes a certain amount of money or drives a certain kind of car or, you know, has a certain kind of job, provides a certain kind of image. You know, I mean, if that's what's going to make you happy, you know, then so be it. Do you? But I encourage you to really think about, what does dating down mean? You know, if you only mean it in terms of those material or external factors, such as how much money that person makes, the kind of life they live, the kind of house house or condo or apartment they have, how often they go on vacations, you know, and where they go on vacation to, you know, I don't know that produces the long-term fulfillment that you want and that you deserve, by the way. Now, if by dating down you mean you're afraid that you're going to be dating somebody who doesn't, who isn't the right, you know, I don't want to say right fit, because I don't like looking at partners as puzzle pieces anymore. I look at people who make good long-term partners as people who mesh well or who vibrate well together, right? They harmonize together. You know, the sum is greater than the parts in the best relationships, I think. You know, if you're just two puzzle pieces and you just go together and nothing really happens from that. So I think the best relationships are people who can elevate one another, but not only can they elevate one another, but they can also accept one another at the same time. So, you know, if what you mean is you don't want to date somebody that isn't right for you, and you don't want to date somebody that doesn't know how to basically provide, you know, I think it's a good thing to be with somebody who can challenge you to a certain extent, but I think what we all also want is somebody who, in addition to that, provides us a feeling of security, provides us a place in their heart and in their life that we feel safe in. You know, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. You don't want to date somebody who can't do that for you. Totally agree. But that's very different than saying, well, I don't want to date this person because they don't make enough money. You know, it's funny. One of the content creator channels that comes to mind when I think about this alpha and beta stuff and think about all these kinds of things, they actually had a woman dating coach on. You know, this is a woman, I don't know if her material is targeted towards only men or only women. It might be both, but you know, she shared her story where she talked about how there was a time in her life where I believe she was dating an athlete, and she basically talked about, like, yeah, you know, like, I thought that's what I wanted, and I lived that life for a while with them, but then, you know, eventually realized I wanted to be married, I wanted to start a family, and they didn't want to do that. So I left, and at some point down the road, they had gone on a date or started dating somebody, and she was on the phone, funnily enough, with a male friend, and I'm going to give a shout, I'm going to give a thumbs up to this male friend because of what he said to her. The male friend's asking her how this new man is going, and she's like, she's describing the good things about him, including the fact that emotionally, things are great. And he goes, but she kind of is holding back and kind of implying that there's a problem. And he goes, well, so what's wrong? Like, why don't you think you might want to pursue this more seriously? And she goes, well, he drives an Explorer. And apparently this was like all over text message, and the friend called her and said, did you really just say that? Like, of all the years I've known you and the kind of person I know you are, did you really just say that? Like, think about what you just said. And what she eventually realized was she was judging this guy and what he could provide for her strictly based upon the kind of car he drove. Because she was believing for whatever reason, well, that implies that he only makes this kind of money or can only provide X this or X that. And she was ignoring the great qualities about this man, and especially the fact that emotionally he was providing her everything that she wanted. And she basically, and I believe that she's engaged to that man now, or married. I could have it wrong. But my point here is, yeah, and I want to say, by the way, so for this isn't just something I'm going to say to any women that watches this. This is also for men too, to think about when they get worried about having to settle, or they think they have to date somebody of a certain status. There is some of this content gets into talks about dominance hierarchies and things like they call it hypergamy, some of these other terms, and I'm not going to go into defining them right now, but there is this idea in this content where typically men will date across and down dominance hierarchies, and women usually will date across and up, right? That's one of the things that they constantly mention. I think that, but I still think that I think we fool ourselves into thinking that that's how it has to be, and I think that only looks at things strictly from an external, from a perspective of external factors, of more primitive markers for survival strategies. So I don't know. I encourage anybody that gets caught up in this talk about being alpha or beta, being, dating down, dating up. It's like, I believe the better message to give to people and to talk about with people is what is right for you. When certain things happen for you, when you're in certain kinds of relationships, what parts come up for you? What parts are present for you? Are you truly, is your authentic you actually the one that's present, or is some other part of you present? Are certain parts getting in the way? I think that those are more important questions to work through, and then you build the kind of life and you build the kind of relationships you want from there. I encourage people to not think about things in regards to you're dating down or you're dating up. Anything, I have to have somebody that gives me this or gives me that. I encourage you to not think like that. I think that it can be very self-defeating. I think that we trap ourselves into that kind of thinking, and I think it's easy for all of us right now to get into that kind of thinking because I happen to think that right now, if you look around the West right now, a constant issue that's coming up is relationships are falling apart, marriages are falling apart, divorce rates are higher than ever, and it's like, well, what's the reason for this? What's the reason for this? I believe, and someday I'll probably do more research so I can have like statistics and data and stuff. But I'm kind of calling it as I see it right now in a lot of ways. I believe that right now across the West, the reason relationships are struggling is because people aren't connecting. And I believe the reason people aren't connecting is because so many of us are so stressed out that we're not present in the moment. We're not up in our frontal and prefrontal cortices where, this is where the present exists. This is where the present exists. This is also where critical thinking exists, right? This is where perception exists, all up in here. But right now, across the West, I think the vast majority of us are all basically chronically stressed. And when you're chronically stressed, you're not up in your prefrontal cortex, you're back in your limbic system. And when you're in your limbic system, it's harder for you to communicate with people effectively. It's harder for you to think critically. It's easier for you to, in the case of, let's say, an anxiety disorder, it's easier for you to have bad logic. And by bad logic, I mean, it's like, you can come to a logical conclusion, even if it's a bad conclusion, and even if it's irrational, you can still use logic to get there. It's just bad logic, right? Like that catastrophizing thing. It's like, yeah, why can't you, basically connect this all the way to a potential catastrophe? Sure. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's rational. You can use bad logic to get there. And I don't like that I'm using bad because I'm not trying to use judgmental language here, but I think you guys understand what I mean. So yeah, I think that basically across the West, and especially here in the States, I think many of us aren't here in the moment. I think many of us are caught up in our limbic systems. We're stressed out. We're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. We're not communicating. We're not connecting. And that's a real problem because the best relationships aren't built in terms of long-term relationships, because, and especially for us humans, we can live for, not just for like a few years or a dozen years or a couple dozen years. We can live for decades, right? I see more and more examples of people living into their 90s and even up to the 100s. So I think the best relationships are built when, rather than being in survival mode, rather than being in our primitive limbic systems, rather than being in fight, flight, or freeze, we're able to exist up here and we're able to communicate, we're able to connect, we're able to cooperate, we're able to build, as I would call them, interdependent relationships where, everything's reciprocal. It's like there's respect for independent autonomy in space. There's also an acknowledgement that we have to work together. We can come together as a team. That all takes place up in here. That ain't taking place back here. Okay? And I think that that's a major, major issue in this country right now. I think that we're all under chronic stress. And that's something that I'm working on right now. I think I kind of basically pointed out in that video, the first video, that I had a lot of realizations, and another one, I guess, I'm not sure if I said it in that video, was that I've been under chronic stress, which has kind of led to my anxiety disorder. And maybe I didn't clue into it until recently that I was probably also depressed at the same time. So I'm probably going to do a different video that talks about getting out of your limbic system and getting back more present in the moment. I'm going to do that another time. Really quick, for the last segment of this video, what I'm going to talk about is kind of building off of that, talking about the limbic system and being in survival mode and being in flight or freeze response, and not being able to communicate and cooperate with one another. I also believe not only is that affecting, let's say, romantic relationships, I also think that that's affecting social relationships. I think that's affecting how we talk to each other socially and politically right now. And to me, the evidence of that this is not, again, like, I'm not using data here necessarily or statistics, but if I was to go on social media in the past 2 weeks, what's the big thing I see people talking about? There's two topics that have been huge. I mean, there's a bunch of topics that everybody's talking about, but the two that kind of stand out to me that I just thought were fucking hilarious was about the Dr. Seuss books and about Mr. Potato Head. And I'm going to share my thoughts on this. I guess I'll start with the Potato Head thing. I don't know how genuine that gesture from Hasbro is about wanting to be inclusive. I certainly think it's about protecting their bottom line. It's one of those things where I don't, because the toy is still going to come with all the same parts, right, and everything. So, to me, it's like, if you had bought a Potato Head and a Mr. Potato Head and Mrs. Potato Head 20 years ago, probably chances are you probably at some point mixed up the two potato pieces, and you probably were putting the parts on either one anyway. So I don't really, it's like, I don't really think it's that big a deal. We're also talking about a toy where, like, it's encouraged for kids to not necessarily have to put it together to look like a Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head. Like, they can put the ear where the mouth goes. Like, it's hilarious. I don't think it would have been a big deal if they hadn't rebranded the line to say just Potato Head. If they had kept Mr. Potato Head as the name of the line, that line of toys, I don't think it would have been a big deal. I also just don't think it's a big deal that they decided to change it to Potato Head. You can still do things. You can still make them into Mr. Potato Head or Mrs. Potato Head. Like, it's such a low hanging fruit, and so I kind of get it. Like, I'm like, it's not like, does it really change anything that much? I don't really know. I also know, like, I think it's silly for anybody to get angry about it, and maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't want to judge anybody who felt a certain way about it. Like, I'm not trying to judge your emotional reaction to it, but I just thought it was hilarious. I thought that was hilarious. And the other thing, and kind of the same thoughts on the Dr. Seuss situation. There's 6 books that got pulled from production. These 6 books apparently have problematic stereotypes. And so his estate that controls his publishing basically decided, okay, like, these are problematic. There also are 6, I think they were the 6 worst selling books. I had never heard of them myself. Like, I don't know any of those titles. So, again, like, how genuine was it? I happen to more so believe that this was a pretty genuine move, and it also protects their bottom line. So, and part of the reason for that is I would like to believe, based upon what I know about the author, Dr. Seuss, and I'm sorry, I forget his actual name. From what I know about him, I think from beyond the grave, he would have approved of this. So, I certainly believe, in the the one book certainly had some issues, especially the one page where it says an Oriental man wearing slits for eyes. Like that, I'm like, dude, that's not cool. Like that's not cool. Like that's not okay. Come on. Like really, that one definitely stood out to me. So I don't know. I think in this case, the difference between this and the potato head thing, I don't think the potato head thing was that big a deal. This, I kind of do think it certainly was a good thing that they pulled these 6 books. And they were the 6 least selling. They were the 6 least selling books. They were the most problematic. I don't know how offended people were either by these books or by the toy line being called Mr. Potato Head or Mrs. Potato Head. I don't know how offended or outraged people were, but or not by these books. But I gotta tell you, the outrage I saw from people feeling outraged that some people might be upset or offended by some of these things. The outrage that I saw from these people just made me go, hold up. Do you all realize how outraged you're acting right now? You're getting upset because, a certain group might have said, like, that's really hurtful that he would say an Oriental man with wearing slants for eyes. You got outraged by that? Like, come on. Like, for real. You're outraged that people might have been upset by that? Come on. And I'm sorry, like, I got to bring it back probably a little bit because I don't want to be judgmental of anybody, but I was just like, what is going on? Because right now, the ones that are outraged and offended are the people that are upset about these moves, if you will. Moves that private companies are making. What was funny was you could go on Facebook after they pulled those 6 books and like people who had copies of those books are like selling them for like $100, $200. It was, I don't know. I thought it was hilarious. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. It amused me. It amused me, and it also, and to an extent, it troubles me at the same time, because this is kind of exactly what I'm talking about. Is I think everybody's just having emotional reactions to everything, and they don't want to admit it. And that's, by the way, like, I don't mean that only. I mean that across the board, and I'm going to set this up as like a political thing in context to like political positions, if you will. I mean, like, if you're a leftist, rightist, centrist, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, libertarian, independent, Green Party, I don't care. I look at what's going on in the world right now and in this country, and I see people constantly being outraged or offended by what the other one said or what the other one didn't say and or has done. And sometimes I think some of this outrage, whether it's coming from the right or from the left, is warranted. And other times I'm kind of like, I think you're all taking things perhaps a little too personally, and you're all so stressed out and you're so far back here in your limbic systems, you don't actually know how to communicate. You don't know how to express yourself in a way that is compassionate while still being compelling. And B, you don't know how to listen in a compassionate or empathetic way. Because you have to be up here to be able to do that. If we want to be able to cooperate with one another, if we want to problem solve together, we all have to kind of learn to take a step back and breathe, get out of our fucking limbic systems, get more present with the moment, and then we can actually start to communicate to each other. And then rather than thinking like this person's wrong, that person's wrong, I'm right, they're wrong, I'm good, they're bad, we can move beyond that kind of judgmental undertones to these discussions, and we can start actually acknowledging one another's humanity and start actually acknowledging that maybe the way they just said something, they just didn't say it in a way that I understand it. So maybe I can ask them a question. Maybe I can get at this. Maybe I can see it. Maybe I can put myself in their shoes. Maybe I can do this. Because right now that's a major issue. You know, I'm dead serious about this. I think a major issue in this country that's affecting us, whether it's in our familial relationships, whether it's in our romantic relationships, whether it's in our social relationships or in our political discussions, I think a major issue in this country right now is that so many of us are so chronically stressed out that we're not actually paying attention, not as fully as we think we are or wish to believe that we are. So this video has gone on for 45 minutes. I want to thank you all for listening. I hope the things I said tonight made sense. I'm actually very happy with myself right now. I've spoken. I made a recording of this video before, and I kind of sometimes I get so nervous about being myself. I start speaking way too softly, and so I kind of feel like for the most part I've been actually speaking with a lot of heart and purpose. So I'm actually very happy with how this has gone. I do hope that you guys are able to follow with me, that the topics I'm talking about make sense, and I hope to keep doing this. You know, I feel kind of good about, you know, I've covered some stuff about, you know, what problematic content I think targeted towards young men and to an extent women, and I also am proud that I was able to fit in a quick talk about what I think is affecting not just those but also the political discourse in this country, because I really do think that we're all just too stressed out, and I'll probably, you know, there'll come a day at some point where I'm going to post a video where I talk about what I think we can change about the system, and I don't like, I'll just say I don't like talking about it in the terms that people usually like talking about it, but I think there are changes that can be made to the system that start to acknowledge where it's good, where its shortcomings are, and you know, you're not always going to be able to fix everything and make everything perfect, but maybe bring things more into balance. So, all right, guys. So I hope everybody has a safe weekend. St. Patrick's Day was Wednesday. Obviously, people are going to be out this weekend, drinking, partying. So if you go out, be safe, have a plan. I think I myself might go get a beer. And yeah, just be safe. Enjoy your life. When you feel yourself getting stressed out and kind of going into that fight or flight or freeze mode, you know, just breathe. Just breathe. Recognize and acknowledge that you're okay, and that whatever's going on, you're going to get through it. Okay? So, take care of yourselves. I love all of you, and I wish you all the best.